Audio Unleashed. We're recording, by the way, so bring us in anytime you want. I'm going to let you kick us off.
Hi, this is Audio Unleashed, and I'm Brent. And who are you?
I'm Dennis. Who are
Good.
you?
Just to confirm, I already said I'm Brent. Brent
Yeah,
Butterworth.
but that doesn't tell me who you are. That just tells me your name.
Brent Everett Butterworth.
What do you want to talk about this week, Brent Everett Butterworth?
I want to talk about the last hi-fi show I will ever attend, which actually was a couple of years ago. But
Yeah.
This is John Darko, who's a much more prominent and important figure in the audio world than I am these days. He did I look at his YouTube often, and I look at more often than not, though, I read his blog or his website, darko.audio. And I was intrigued because he did, he's normally, pretty enthusiastic about his field.
Yeah.
And this is an article about, he goes to the Munich show and basically, he does a Munich show report. He shows the things that he thinks are interesting there, but then he talks about how he doesn't feel audio shows have any merit. And I thought, wow, well, we are I don't know that we would make such strong statements except through our physical presence or lack thereof.
Yeah.
So I thought, let's talk about that and let's muse about whether or not we're ever going to go to an audio show again and under what circumstances and what will we do there?
That's a good point. That's a really, really good point. So after that, next subject, this was a recommendation from one of our patrons, Jim F., who sent me the video. We had a bit of a back and forth conversation about it. But this is another YouTube video from a channel called Audio Judgement, which not quite as pithy as Audio Unleashed. And it's spelled wrong. It's Judgment with two E's. Anyway, the title of the video is Cheap versus Expensive Crossovers Blind Test. So what this guy did was basically set up a thing where he had a crossover for a speaker, one made with very expensive components of the sort that, I think it would be fair to say Danny Ritchie is constantly touting the benefits of.
Exactly,
and another one using admittedly sort of cherry-picked, but much cheaper components. And he did his listening. It wasn't as blind as it could have been, I think we could say, fairly, but still, it was a neat test. It was a valid test, and we'll talk about what he heard, what he didn't hear, and the results of the testing. And I'm sure you're going to have a lot more to say about it than I am, but it'll be a fun conversation. So
I was delighted to watch this. Yeah,
it
was because I wanted to know. I did not know.
Yeah,
and now I feel like I know something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I think our listeners will also feel that way. Yeah. And for our third segment, we found two articles in more or less high-end audio publications that were both interesting, but completely contradictory. One of them is by Stephen Stone, who's a friend of the pod and personal friend of both of us. Yeah. And it is in the Power of Music and Audio magazine, PMA magazine. And it's called Do Blind Listening Tests Work? My Sessions with the Colorado Audio Society. Now, the other of the articles is by Roger Scoff, who I think you haven't met, but he's an old friend of mine. And I've known him since the early 90s. He's the founder of XLO Audio. And I guess he sold that, and I think he made all of his money in finance anyway before all this happened. And sold, founded XLO, did well, sold it. Still kind of works as a consultant, I think, for some audio companies. But he's been a columnist for a few different publications. I've certainly edited him for, I want to say it was Audiophile Review. Maybe it was Home Theater Review. I can't remember. I've shared some very nice meals with him, and he's quite the raconteur.
Yeah.
which means someone who tells stories, which is exactly what he's doing here.
Yeah.
This article's titled Magic Snake Oil. Roger Scoff writes the real truth about hi-fi. And in this, basically, he's saying that double-blind testing doesn't work for audio.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to talk about this because there's lots of people that say similar things to this.
Yeah.
They are not correct. They are
right.
I don't know if they're intentionally misleading, but they are misleading. They are certainly incorrect. They are certainly not grounded in fact or rationality. It's grounded in a desire to not have to do blind testing, or whatever desire. I don't know what desire it is. The desire to believe whatever you want to believe about audio, whatever.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it.
Speaking of which, for our Patreon segment,
we're going to talk about a Facebook post from Mr. Ted Denny. Ted Denny is, I think most of you know, he's the owner, but what other titles does he have with Synergistic Research? The Master of Propaganda, probably. That's a joke. That is humor. I'm making a joke, satire, something. Anyway, he's the head of Synergistic Research.
Chief Scientist.
Oh,
also a joke, but in my opinion, strictly my opinion. Which I'm still, for the moment, free to express. That may change by the time we edit this podcast. But
yeah. So basically, he goes on this long tirade on Facebook, and the subject of this is, well, he's just saying the full technical explanation of our systems. What he's really talking about is the electromagnetic cell in the power cell products, which are just power conditioners. So these are things that you plug into the mains outlet in your wall, and it gives you a number of outlets that you can plug gear into. And that, long and short of it is like a power strip, but this is not just a power strip. It is a surge protector, I guess, or power conditioner, filter, all sorts of things. And he is jumping through hoops to kind of defend scientific principles that he claimed demonstrate that there's real value to what he's doing here. But for the most part, it's just a very sort of Trumpy rant and a threat, and basically saying, if you can dismantle the logic, do it, but you won't. And then there's blah, 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 technical stuff that he doesn't even understand. And then he feeds all of this to Grok, which is the large language model, basically sort of the equivalent of ChatGPT, but this is the one that Elon Musk owns and has been training to deny the Holocaust. And he gets Grok to explain the validity of the way his system works. And at some point, I think, in my opinion, it seems like Ted starts having a nervous breakdown. But then at the end, he gets very defiant and triumphant again. Anyway, the best thing about this is the comments section, but we had to dig into this because his premise is flawed from the word go, and we're going to talk about that in the Patreon segment. We're going to talk about why we feel that way in our opinions, and we may have slightly different takes, but we're going to dismantle this and have some fun with it.
Although we do have to admire that his entire screed is written in a sort of Yoda-like haiku quasi poetry. It's just really bizarre.
It really reminds me a lot of the way large language models write. So, I mean, in some ways, if you had just handed me this and said, analyze this, I would have said, I think a large language model wrote this entire post. So do I have any evidence for that? Any proof for that? No. But yeah, it's very weird.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's start with talking about stuff that's a little less weird. Let's talk about some stuff that's actually valid and fun. Let's talk about Darko's video, man.
The last hi-fi show I will ever attend, which is very, sad to me because you would never meet John Darko then.
Yeah.
Except I can't imagine that he wouldn't continue to go to hi-fi shows, especially one like, say, Warsaw, where it's more low key and it's more, but the best thing about this video to me was that he made a case. He didn't, look, most of these guys will just sit there and go, people have been saying this for 30 years. I don't like audio shows because audio shows suck. And I don't like to go to Las Vegas. And I don't like blah, blah. And I don't like having to pay my own way. The magazine or the website should pay my way and all this stuff. But he doesn't do that at all. He actually gives examples of like how his biggest point is it is completely fruitless to try to judge audio components from listening at trade shows. And he gives examples of how loud these rooms are and how even the people, mostly the people doing the demonstrating, the company with its founder, its marketing director, its engineers, whoever in there, it's like there's a constant chatter in so many of these rooms where people just won't shut the hell up. And that's always been frustrating to me. And I mean, some people are a lot more serious. When you go to, when like John DeVore from DeVore Fidelity does demos, it's usually, I think there's more reverence in the room. I think he attracts that kind of crowd more. That it's going to be quiet and serious. But a lot of these people are just blah, 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 blah. And then the show floor sound in Munich for a lot of these spaces was like screamingly loud. I mean, even the sound like leaking in. You haven't been to Munich, so they have all these halls, and it's kind of like almost like a shopping mall kind of. Can you go in this like middle area, and there's a bunch of glass enclosed spaces. They're enclosed with glass on like one side, and they're drywalled or whatever. But those, just tons of sound leaks in from the outer areas where people are going back and forth, the big giant hallways. And it was loud. I mean, it was so, I felt John's frustration as I was watching this, going like, God, that just must be so annoying to go into a room and people want to show you how great their audio gear is, and they're just going like, blah, 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 blah. Not just for the presentation, but while they're playing music.
Yep. Yeah. I love the way Cedia used to do things. Cedia was fun because like it would be, kind of no matter where you were, there would be the big exhibit hall, the show floor, and some of them would have booths and things like that. But then you would have listening rooms that would be these little fully enclosed cubicles with good sound isolation. And I mean, some of the best Golden Ear demos that I ever heard, Golden Ear technology speaker demos, were at Cedia. What's funny is Cedia is not a hi-fi show, but had some of the best hi-fi demos I ever heard just because they had good sound isolation.
Yeah.
But you never really got that at CES, which is the other major audio trade show that I've been to. I've never been to Axpona. Have you been?
No. I guess I'll never go. Probably. Never say never, but never say never either.
You're going to have to diagram that one for me.
Your head is now like locked permanently like one of those androids from Star Trek that like, Captain Kirk like talked into destroying themselves by saying stupid crap. But one thing I kind of disagree with John about, although he probably wouldn't disagree with me, is that I think the value of audio shows, listening at audio shows is not entirely useless. For people that are trying to make judgments about, I don't know, an amplifier or a speaker or something, it is useless. But for people that are going just to check out audio, it is very useful because you will, at any of these audio shows, you're going to find a couple of really good sounding rooms, right? Really good sounding systems. And it can show you what's possible. And then you'll also find, you're going to go in some rooms where you hear products that have been touted by audio reviewers, and you hear them and you're like, this is obviously crap.
Yeah.
Obviously total crap. What are these people thinking? And then you start to think maybe some of these reviewers don't know as much as they think they do or as much as they say they do. I mean, that's really useful. And I think it's great. I mean, there's also the social aspects. I mean, you will meet other audio reviewers who, as much as we criticize them, we, by and large, they're much more interesting to talk to than your average person.
Absolutely.
They are almost always pretty interesting people. And
I've made some great friends at these shows, man. And lifelong friends.
Yeah, and it's fun to go look at gear and go, shoot the breeze with people that are into audio. And Munich is huge, and like Munich is hard to cover in 3 days or whatever.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much there. And, it's all audio, 100% audio, as opposed to say CES, where whatever, there's a little bit of consumer audio and a lot of OEM stuff and a lot of Chinese companies you've never heard of and that are just pushing the OEM ODM side.
Right.
But Munich is all the stuff that you can actually go buy. I think it's 100% stuff you can actually go buy, at least in Europe. And so that's why I like it. And that's why I really do hope that you and I do go to one more audio show in our lives, and that is the Munich show.
Well, there's no more Munich show, buddy.
Well, it's Vienna. What's the difference? The food's about the same. The buildings look pretty much the same. What's the point?
I've never been to Vienna before. I've been to Munich. I've never been to Vienna. So,
well, I've been on the train through Vienna, and the train did stop. And so I looked at Vienna out the train window.
Oh, well, that makes you an expert then.
But I also, our friend, acclaimed travel writer Jeffrey Morrison has been there and raves about it. So that means something.
Yeah.
But it'd be so awesome to go though and just hang out and not have to write, not have to spend our nights writing stupid blogs about, the new blah blah whatever speaker or some new amplifier, for God's sake. Amplifiers.
Yeah. This whole on the scene show coverage thing is way more exhausting than most people will ever understand. That's why, I think Darko's smart to go see what he's going to see, maybe shoot some B-roll or something like that, and then come back and prepare his coverage. Because one of the things we're overlooking is, in addition to, him talking about this being his last hi-fi show, he still does pretty good coverage of the things that he saw that were worth talking about. He talks about new products from Wim. He talks about the fact that he asked the company themselves, like, is it Wim or Weem? And they were like, it is Wim. And, hey, there's value in that. He talked about a bunch of different Ever Solo products that he saw, DAPs that he saw, speakers that he saw, all sorts of things. So there's really good show coverage here. And I think it's useful, but I also look, Soundstage, my editorial overlords, they also do a lot of coverage, and they do this sort of, we're here, we just saw this, we're writing about it kind of thing. And I have to say, I personally kind of prefer Darko's digests, because with the actual coverage from the floor, it's kind of too much, man.
It is.
And do I really care about everything? I mean, go see what you're going to see, then give me an overview, filter it, tell me what's important. But when you're there at the show floor, you can't filter as well. And you don't have perspective of having seen everything already. Well, everything you're going to see, which is probably, 5% of the show.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I thought it was good show coverage. Good job, John.
Yeah. I have to say, I did like doing it for Soundstage, because I would kind of not do what everybody else did. And I would try to get Doug or Jeff to assign me a category and say, look, let me cover stands and accessories or something. And I would just go out and find 7 cool stands and accessories, and that's it. And here's the 7 coolest ones from the show. And then I go cover maybe sound bars or something. Here's the 7 coolest sound bars. And just do categories like that, where it's like, okay, here's a category you're interested in, as opposed to say Stereophile, where it's like, so-and-so room. This room had this manufacturer and this manufacturer and this manufacturer, and the inner detail was astounding. And I talked to chief founder, whoever, head scientist, something or another, and he told me his stuff was really great.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like you could AI that stuff. You don't even need to go to the show. AI. Oh, there's somebody should do that. AI show coverage. Just do it with AI and just make it all up and see if it's really any different from what most of these publications do.
There's already somebody doing that, dude.
I'm sure.
There's got to be.
Well, I mean, we've both kind of probably done that a little bit in terms of writing things about shows we didn't even go to.
No.
I have.
I can't think of any of those that I've done. There's one other aspect of going to shows that Darko doesn't talk about here, probably because it's just not relevant to him. I mean, look, Darko is a headliner. I've never been a headliner, right? But I'll tell you, one of the things I noticed about going to shows, at least for a while, is, I used to request a product for review, and maybe it would be a PR person that I've had interactions with a few times before, and they're like, "Oh, we'll get back to you on that." Well, I see that person at a trade show and I shake their hand and I'm like, "Oh, hey, when can I get one of these in?" And they're like, "Oh man, we'll put you next on the list, man. You'll get the next one in we get." So there is something to be said for meeting the PR people and the people behind the company and the engineers and actually getting on their radar, because look, we're all humans, right? And they're making decisions, and they're making decisions based on, human emotions. And having seen me and talked to me and maybe had a beer with me or whatever makes them more likely to go, "Oh yeah, let's get him some review gear."
And you will see stuff that, not every company has it together enough to go like, "Oh, this guy reviews this product. Maybe we should send our product to him." That's surprisingly a bit of a stretch for a lot of companies. And, so you're like, "Oh, here's this major manufacturer of a thing that I have reviewed for years and am known for, but I've never heard of them, so I will introduce myself." High-end audio companies are not necessarily the masters of marketing, No.
You know what kind of trade show I want to go to, buddy?
What?
I want to go to a trade show for those handheld air dusters.
Oh, man. This is the exciting new product category.
Yeah.
We'll have our own website. We'll get to jump. We're going to start a website devoted to, wait, I'm thinking so old school. We're going to start a YouTube channel devoted to handheld air dusters.
Oh, yeah. For any of you who have no idea what we're talking about, before we started rolling tape, we're talking about handheld air dusters, this reasonably new product category that I don't understand why it's reasonably new, but they pretty much replace canned air for me for the rest of my life, and they charge for the USB-C. So I think they're great. And more people need to be talking about them, and they need their own trade shows because, one of them might have a brush nozzle and the other one might have a tapered nozzle. Anyway, I'm rambling. I think that means we've probably said enough about trade shows for the time being, don't you think, bud?
We have. What are we moving on to next? What do you got for us?
Crossovers and blind listing. Yeah.
Excellent.
All right. We'll take a break, listen to music, more music from our friend Michael Gaughn, who is sadly no longer with us. And then we'll be back to talk about that in just a bit.
Awesome.
We're back. This is Audio
Unleashed.
And this time around, as I said in the intro, we're talking about a video that one of our patrons, Jim App, sent me. And we had a bit of a back and forth about this. It's a fun little video from a YouTube channel called Audio Judgement. And the headline is Cheap versus Expensive Crossover, brackets, blind test. This is just one guy, this is not a guy in a laboratory or anything like that. And, it is quite possible that somebody could, pick holes in his methodology. And in fact, there are people in the comment section who do recommend ways that he could improve his methodology.
Yeah, sure.
But the long and short of it is basically he builds two speaker crossovers, one out of very expensive components, expensive capacitors and inductors, and one out of very cheap ones. And actually does some listening between them, and first gives his impressions. Oh, the speaker on the left, on the speaker on the right, he sort of describes the differences between them. And then he's like, I'm going to guess this is the more expensive one. And then he traces the wires and figures it out and reveals in the end. And I got to say, though, and buddy, in my opinion, the results weren't the most interesting thing about this video for me. The most interesting thing about it all is the discussion about ESR, the what was that? The equivalent, what was the term that he used?
Series resistance.
Yes, equivalent series resistance. I knew you'd know that off the top of your head. But just talking about not merely the difference in quality between these components, but the differences in electrical behavior between them, and why the expensive components, it's not necessarily a matter of better or worse, it's a matter of different. And I thought that was interesting in a lot of ways. I should have written this down, but one of the things he's talking about, like, with the when it comes to capacitors, like he was expecting, I think he said something like he was expecting like 50 milliohms for each capacitor, and it was something like 5 milliohms or something like that. Anyway, it was just very fascinating to me just to see how differently these things measured, and again, not a necessarily good, better, best way, but a very different way.
Yeah. One thing I loved about this is I liked his sort of fumbling around at finding a reasonable way to test these things. And I don't agree with everything he did, but I loved, he jumbled the cables up. And that's something I do that people don't do a lot. I have switchers that I've built specifically for A/B testing. And I also have an ABX box. And sometimes I just, when I'm doing, ABs between, say, computer speakers or something for Wirecutter, or ABCs or ABCDs, I just jumble up the wires and plug them all in. And then I have a microphone back at my listening position where I match all the levels with that. And so, and I'm down by the front of the speakers where I can't see the drivers or anything. So I don't know which one's playing. I just match all the levels, and I go back up. And then usually I will also take a half an hour break just to make absolutely sure I don't remember anything. I'll take a lunch break or something. And I go back to it, and I'm like, I don't know what speaker was which. I think the thing that I think is weird about the video is he's showing himself listening from, he's got two speakers side by side. It's the same speaker. And he's showing himself like off at an angle from the two while he's listening, which I can't imagine he actually did. I think he just did it for the video, because nobody would do that. Because, the off-axis response to the two speakers, even if they're perfectly matched, is going to be different enough to where you can tell the difference between them.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't think he did that. I think he's obviously smart enough not to do that. I think, though, that one of the people pointed out that, drivers aren't perfectly matched, and you could hear a difference between just unmatched drivers. You would hope that they are, and with a lot of the better speakers, probably they are better matched. But you need to be, as one of the people pointed out, you could rig up a switcher where you switch between the two different crossovers. You have to probably make the switcher, but not that hard. I could do it. I might even have enough switching horsepower in my very lab here to where I could kind of figure out a way to do that. I also love that he talked about, he compared the cheap parts before he even put them in a speaker. He compared them to the expensive parts. And he talks about how the tolerances on the cheap parts are a lot broader typically than what you get with the expensive ones.
Right.
And how he went in and hand matched some of them as best as he could, although he couldn't get them perfect. And he says in there, like, I couldn't get it perfect. So, but this is just what's going to happen when you get cheaper parts. And he also didn't measure the speakers. I would have been interested to see measurements of them and see if they perform measurably different, which I'm sure they did. I mean, I measure two speakers a lot of times, and almost always they are significantly different. I mean, I shouldn't say significant. Subtly different, audibly different, though, I think, if you,
noticeably
in many
different.
cases. And what's that?
Noticeably different, right? Whether or not it's significant, it's just like you could look at it and go, oh, there are these distinctions.
Hard to say. I mean, I've gotten pairs of speakers that were fairly crappy or had factory defects where they were not matched, and like you'll notice the signal might pull to one side at certain frequencies, in which case you have a bad speaker match. But anyway, I was just kind of delighted though that he did this whole blind thing, and he's like, hey, the two are different. It's not clear that one's necessarily better, but I do like this one better, and I think that's the more expensive one. That turns out to be the cheap one. And he's using, iron core chokes and, cheap electrolytic capacitors. And again, you don't have the tolerance that you're going to get with higher end product. But, he got a more than acceptable result from this.
Yeah.
And that says a lot. I don't know. Obviously, look, we have a certain sense of pride in what we buy, and we want to buy things that are made with better parts and not with just generic stuff that you bought off Parts Express. But, does it really make a difference? Like so many other things in high-end audio, it's like, well, I don't know, but, it's made better. It's got better parts. I feel more pride in spending more money for something that's well made, and even if it's like sort of like buying an amp with a big, giant, thick aluminum faceplate as opposed to one with just a, flimsy 1970s pro audio style aluminum faceplate.
Yeah, yeah.
But I thought he did a really good job here, and I'm kind of a little mad that I didn't do this 20 years ago for Sound and Vision, because they would have let me. And, or for Soundstage, when I first started writing for them and I wasn't focusing on headphones exclusively, they would have let me do it. Honest publications would let you do this. Or I should say the most honest. Ones that are partly honest-ish might let you, and some of them would not let you in a million years, because it would just debunk some of their advertisers' claims, and they don't want to do that, obviously.
Yeah.
So, but it was eye-opening for me because I really did not know. I really kind of assumed that, having built some of my own stuff and having, seen the differences, measured the differences between different components. Like when I built my first lobe resistor, I went into a shop in New York that had them, this really wacky old shop that I'm sure is long gone. And it was like 2 stories, and it was full of the most arcane stuff. And the guy had a big thing of lobe resistors in there. And these were inexplicably, I needed 8 ohm lobe resistors. And these were inexplicably 7 ohm rated. He said, I bet he's like, just, he gave me a voltmeter. He says, just go through them and, you probably find a bunch of them that are pretty close to 8. And I did. Which is a pretty big variance, but they were, they were non-inductive. It was a fairly esoteric thing, but I did find a whole bunch. I found, I can't remember how many I needed, probably 12 of them, because I was set up to measure 6-channel amps, which were in vogue at the time. And I did. It is pretty shocking how big of a difference, but it can be shocking, as in this case, how little of a difference it might make and how it might improve the sound or it might make it worse. You don't really know.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're going to be making really expensive gear anyway, if you're going to be doing the fancy cabinet, if you're going to be doing the milled aluminum and all of that and VU meters, and, you're going to be selling an amp for thousands of dollars. Well, you have to start thinking about like how much would it cost for you in labor to go through and see if your components are in spec, and then like, are you spending more money in the long run than you would be just buying the more expensive capacitors and inductors? It's calculus. I mean, it's a value proposition thing from top to bottom. So I don't think anybody here is saying there's no value in high quality crossover parts, it's just, is it going to necessarily result in better sound quality the way someone like Danny Ritchie would have you believe it would?
Yeah. And that's really the question. And although he also points out that electrolytic caps do not last as long as film caps. So, I've seen that in, I've actually gotten a couple of old tube amps. I dug a couple of old ones out of the garbage, other people's garbage, not mine. That's probably saying something bad about me. But anyway, I found an amp in like right by NYU in the garbage can. It was an H.H. Scott tube amp, and I'm kind of like, I got most of the tubes out of the garbage as well, and I put it together, added a couple tubes, and it worked, although it did not work for long, and I kind of recapped some of them, and then it worked for a while, and then I got tired of it, and I gave it away or threw it back away or something. But, it does, electrolytic caps definitely die on you. So, that's something to consider. And certainly if you're trying to make, if you're John DeVore, previously mentioned, and you're trying to make a great speaker, and of course your audience will pay, your customers will pay $10,000 a pair for a speaker, you're not going to put cheap caps in there. You're going to try to do an absolutely first-class job.
Yeah.
And, so that's fine. But I think it is also good to be aware that, like, when manufacturers claim, when their first claim they're making about their speaker is the super high-end parts they used, kind of like, maybe they don't quite understand what makes a speaker work right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point. It's a really good point.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, buddy, I think we've pretty much covered this one from top to bottom, unless you got anything else to say about it.
No, I'm reading the comments, and one guy says he's got a pair of Tecton Moabs, where he did the crossover upgrade for a lot of money, and he could tell in stereo, but he couldn't tell in mono. Oh, and by the way, whenever I say Tecton, I make the heart sign with my hands, and
is that like doing the cross sign with your fingers if you're in a vampire movie?
Maybe, I don't know. It's coming from the same place, I'm sure. And
okay.
But this guy's saying that, in stereo, you could tell the difference, but in mono, you couldn't. And I would liken the change to making a big step up in amplification. Everything was cleaner, clearer, less congested, more effortless. It was almost like taking a blanket off the speakers that I didn't know had been there. Oh, boy.
I've never heard that before, ever.
That's a little,
wow.
His language is a little too cut and paste for me to take that real seriously. But I do agree, though. I like to test. I mean, people test in stereo for a real world effect because they're used in stereo, but, all the research shows that you will get more discernment if you stick to mono speaker testing.
Yeah.
And I agree.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some more blind testing and some more not blind testing.
Yeah. Maybe we should call that segment blind testing versus the blind leading the blind.
Yes. Okay, that's fine. Well, you make up the names, so it's up to you.
Okay. I'm not going to do that because that would be like calling our shots, and it's never fun when we do that. Okay. Anyway, we're going to listen to some music. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about, PMA Magazine.
Yeah. And we're back. This is Audio
Unleashed.
Ooh, get out the woofer for that one.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about two articles, both of which appear in high-end audio publications online. The first of which is, but they contradict each other almost entirely.
Big time.
I'm sure. I think probably both of these guys are friends to some extent, and probably would not say their articles contradict each other. I don't know.
Well, Stephen writes for Positive Feedback.
True.
So, yeah, they rub elbows there. But I don't know if Positive Feedback, would have published this article from Stephen. I don't know.
And they've both been around forever and surely have crossed paths.
Yeah.
And I think Stephen was also the editor of Audiophile Review, which I think Roger wrote for. So anyway, the first one is by Stephen Stone, and it's called, it's in pmamagazine.org, and it's called Do Blind Listening Tests Work? My Sessions with the Colorado Audio Society. The second article is by Roger Scoff in Positive Feedback, and it is titled Magic Snake Oil. Roger Scoff writes the real truth about hi-fi. Magic snake oil.
Anytime I see the real truth in a headline, I'm like, no. That reminds me of a trend you see a lot on YouTube of like, this is my honest review. It's like, why did you have to say that? Yeah. That makes me suspicious. I wouldn't have necessarily gone in thinking it was a dishonest review, but now that you've said it's an honest review, I'm kind of thinking maybe it is a dishonest review. Anyway, whatever. Tangent. Sorry.
Yeah, I was more struck by the magic snake oil. I mean, does it really need the descriptor magic? I mean, snake oil is snake oil, right? Maybe there's...
the history of snake oil, though?
I really don't. No. It was something from like the 1800s.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, like, it was Chinese immigrants who there were in many ways like valid uses, medicinal uses for snake oil stuff, but then it created the situation where people started selling knockoff snake oil, right? And somehow or another, snake oil became conflated with counterfeit snake oil or something like that. It's like the whole history of the phrase snake oil is fraught with contradictions and weird left turns that you just would not see coming. You should read about it sometimes. It's fascinating. But I mean, if you're going to, given all of that, magic snake oil is just kind of rolls off my back, man. Whatever.
Yeah. So let's get into Stephen's article. And I think probably, he says it kind of right up front. Blind comparisons, free from the influence of price, brand, technology, aesthetics, or other personal non-sonic biases, represent the purest form of subjective evaluation. So why aren't blind tests more popular with audiophiles? The answer is simple. Conducting a well-designed, truly unbiased blind test is a pain in the ass. I know because I just completed one with help of members from the Colorado Audio Society. And boy, he's right about that. I have an ABX box, right? So, and I have switchers that I've built specifically for blind testing. So it's much easier for me than it, and that's after I had done a lot of blind testing. So I knew what I needed. And people who've borrowed my blind switcher are just fall in love with it because it makes testing so easy. And it makes testing much more accurate. But anyway, so he wanted to compare two DACs. One of them was cheap, although it had a lot of sort of aftermarket mods to it. And one of them, I have to go to the end of the article to see what they were because he doesn't reveal until the end. One of them was the Gustard A26, which is expensive. It's a 2150 with a fancy clock on it, I guess. But there's also the Fosi Audio ZD3. And, Fosi Audio makes a whole lot of, to cut it short, $100 stuff. Whole lot of stuff for about $100 or cheaper or a little more expensive, but $100. So it's a cheap DAC. It's, does he say what it costs here? I'm not sure he actually tells you the cost of the Fosi, but
If you go to Amazon, it's $170.
Okay, so the whole, but he also put a separate power supply on it, a linear power supply instead of the switching power supply, and he put a capacitor bank on it that comes after the power supply, which just stores, smooths out the power more. So that's about $500 versus and that includes a Raspberry Pi he used to stream audio to it. Nice. So including the Raspberry Pi, the Fosi setup was $500 and the Gustard was $2,150. So anyway, he sets these up. He matches the levels. He correctly tells you to what degree he matched the levels, which is the right way to do it.
But even before that, and one of the things I really love is he gives you a complete breakdown of the signal chain from top to bottom.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because, look, as we mentioned in the discussion of the last video, you can always criticize somebody's methodology. And when Stephen emailed you and me about this piece, I had some suggestions about how he could have improved his testing and methodology a little bit. But the point is, his methodology is fully laid out and detailed. So you can pick it apart if you want to. So if there is a crucial flaw in how he did this, you could be like, hey, here's a way you could do better next time. And I really, really like that. I mean, it is 1, 2, 3, 4 whole paragraphs just about the signal chain. That's awesome.
Yeah. And he also talks about the material they used for the testing, 2 different cuts. And my attitude is this: if people don't explain their methodology, and by that I mean a lot more than like, oh, here's the long list of very expensive gear that I borrowed from audio manufacturers to use for my testing, which is usually all the quote unquote methodology you get. I assume their methodology is, I sat around in a dirty t-shirt and a pair of shorts drinking beer or scotch or something and listening to whatever the hell I felt like. And then, after a while, I changed to a different component and I did not match the levels, but I don't need to match the levels because I have magic ears and blah, blah. Basically, no methodology at all. If they don't explain their methodology, you can assume there was nothing worthy of being called a methodology.
Right.
That's always my assumption. And you know what? If you don't like it, audio reviewers, tough luck. Put your methodology in there. Honestly, I have been in that place where I did not put all my methodology in, and I just was attacked so many times of readers going like, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? I'm like, well, I did that. I just didn't say I did it. And so eventually I just started putting in all the details that people asked for and trying to make it as unboring as I could, but just basically trying to explain everything so that you don't get shot down by people. And, and also once in a while, someone will point out like, hey, I've had a few readers point out, hey, you should use this test signal instead of this one because this, right? And, for example, for speaker testing, I had a reader suggest that I use Dolby, channel balancing noise instead of pink noise. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought he couldn't be more right. Because Dolby noise for channel balancing, if it's done correctly, which who knows nowadays, but because I've heard it done wrong, but if it's done correctly, it's windowed pink noise, like a certain range of pink noise, band limited pink noise with the band centered at 800 hertz, right? And that gets rid of the bass problem. That gets rid of the bass where you're going to have ups and downs in the bass because of the room. And, it kind of centers it on the areas where you're really going to notice a level mismatch. That's just for speakers, not for electronics. Electronics are presumed to be flat. Right. Sometimes incorrectly presumed, but that's the assumption you make because what else are you going to do? But he goes through his whole signal chain and he has outside listeners and he does not tell the outside listeners what's going on. So, he tells you what his speakers were and all that kind of thing. And he has multiple listeners, but he's got a sweet spot, like a definite sweet spot where people can, get a certain amount of time in the sweet spot. And he's open about the limitations of his testing. He's open about everything he did. And that's basically all I told him when he sent me this article. He sent me like a pre-press version to look at. And that's what I told him, is I'm like, just be even, you're already being open, but be even more open and just put more detail in there. And the results he got were like, the people heard differences, but it wasn't, it wasn't the huge and clear differences that you see in uncontrolled testing, where some guys just listen to the thing. There you start to hear, oh my God, this DAC just blew this other one away, which once you do blind testing, you do not hear, oh, this DAC blew this one away. Nope. You hear, just as we've done with Wirecard, it's like, they're different a little bit. Mm-hmm. Does it matter? I don't know. Maybe. Which one do I like? Maybe this one for this kind of music, but maybe on this cut, this one sounded better. And that's what you really get. And that's exactly the kind of results he got here. Now, he does say, hey, look, this more expensive one is worth it. It's got a lot more features. It's got different digital filters. It's got a much nicer chassis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So fine. He's not shooting down the more expensive product. And I got to say, to his credit, Stephen kind of got into blind testing really years ago. I can't remember how long ago, but I remember he kind of wasn't into it, but then he just started doing it. And he wrote an article, I think, for Audiophile Review about his attempts to do blind testing with DACs and how difficult it is, because you got to have a separate computer for each DAC, right? You can't drive them both off of one computer, sadly.
But now with Rune, you got a lot more flexibility in the way you can send different signals. So that's what he's used here, and that's all detailed in his methodology and why he was able to make this work so much better. So,
but that's the thing is, once he started doing blind testing, he started going like, I'm not the differences among these things aren't as important as I previously thought, and that's exactly what happened to me. Is the more controlled and more careful my testing got, the less apparent these differences were.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, let's examine an opposing point of view from Roger Scoff.
The thing is, this article started off so well, man.
Yeah.
I mean, just the first paragraph, or not the first paragraph, but like the second paragraph, where he talks about, people in other hobbies, like, car guys or camera guys, they understand how their stuff works so much more than we do. And I was like, ooh, yes, yes. And then it just completely goes off the rails. It's like I've in recent memory, I don't remember as promising a setup being followed so quickly by so disappointing a payoff. Kind of sad.
Well, his big point that he makes here, or that he's trying to make, is that blind testing doesn't work. This is what he's saying. Blind testing doesn't work in audio because you can't. I'm trying to find his exact words here, because you can't isolate a specific performance characteristic. Is that what he said?
Yeah. I mean, basically, it boils down to the fact that you can't ensure that everybody is hearing exactly the same thing, because differences in position, differences in where you are in relation to this part of the room or that part of the room or what have you, means that since it can't be perfect, therefore it's useless. That's what it boils down to. He talks about the fact that, say we had identical systems, identical electronics, identical speakers, what would we hear? And then he goes on to say it would depend entirely on the space, the listening room, outdoors, anechoic chamber, or whatever else we played it in, and where the speakers are placed within that space, and where we were positioned relative to those speakers, and what, if anything else, furniture, other people, miscellaneous reflectors, diffractors, and or absorbers was in the room with us. So basically what he's saying essentially is there are too many you can't control all the variables. Therefore, why bother?
Right, but you can't. In what kind of blind testing can you control all the variables? So, you ever done a drug test?
Oh yeah.
I did one in college. My roommate and I were both suffering from allergies, which is, we were in Denton, Texas, which is allergy central. And I saw this thing on in the union bulletin board at school that said, hey, drug testing, and we pay you, I don't know, like $100 or something a person. To me, that was a pretty great money back then. Maybe like 120, 150, but it was like not a ton of money, but like enough for college kids to be like, oh, wow. But they did not if it would have been a single variable, they would have had to shove us into different rooms and not let us experience any other stimulus and feed us exactly the same thing, et cetera, right? Because, hey, man, what you eat and what you do during the day and things like that is going to affect the way a drug works on you. But They didn't do that. They gave us these drugs and, I got the kick-ass new allergy drug they were testing, and it was awesome. And my roommate got the placebo.
Oh, wow.
Now, we don't know that, but, I had total relief from symptoms and he had zero relief from symptoms.
Yeah.
But although one of our friends heard about it, he did it. He got the kick-ass one. He had a huge reaction and he had to go to the hospital, but which they paid for. But anyway, it's nice. This is a guy from the audio industry who's not a scientist, to my knowledge. It certainly does not evince the mindset of a scientist, saying, oh, double-blind testing doesn't work. And he's basically negating all double-blind testing, really, or most double-blind testing, or an awful lot of it, that's for sure. And it's okay, on the one side you have science. On the other side you have an audio writer.
Yeah.
I hate to make an appeal to authority, but come on. And also, we do have proof that blind testing works because, people like Sean Olive and Todd Welty, both sadly recently retired. Well, happy for them, sad for the audio industry, have done, and Floyd Toole, of course, extensive blind testing that, accurately predicts what most people will like in a speaker or headphone. Okay. Yeah. And it works. That's why, the Harman results have certainly become the industry standard for speakers, and speakers have improved tremendously since before the Harman research was introduced, because I was there for all of it. And and I've measured so many speakers, and it used to be you measured speakers and they were all over the map. Every one was crazy. And now they're pretty consistent. And now you can go buy cheap speakers for $230 or something, like the Polk, what is it, Signature or something 15s that I have, that are phenomenally good speakers. And they measure beautifully and they sound wonderful and they're cheap. And, we couldn't have had that had we not had that double-blind testing that showed what works in a speaker. And the same thing with amplifiers. Double-blind tests of amplifiers really don't show much difference. And that's why we do not have any clear standard for what constitutes a good-sounding amplifier or a bad-sounding amplifier, because there's amplifiers that measure differently, and people are like, oh, I like this one, or it could be like Stephen's DAC test we just talked about, where it's okay, there's two different DACs, and some people like this one better, and some people like this one better. And Roger talks about how, again, people, it's like audio writers, you lazy. I get so mad about this because they have to keep bringing up the same example over and over for 30 years. And I'll read it. One very clear proof of this is the mid-fi electronics of times past. Many of those products used high levels of global feedback to cancel distortion, but Despite claimed success, published distortion rates in the range of 0.000001%, they simply didn't sound good. Prove it. Prove it. Prove it.
Yeah.
I'll give you $1,000 if you prove that. I am tired of people saying this. Anybody who says this is I'm sorry, Roger, that's just really lazy. Prove it. Show me the test results. Show me, okay, we measured this amp and it has a lot of global feedback and it has super, super low distortion and it failed in blind listening tests. Show me that. You cannot show me that. That is a false, ridiculous, completely absurd, completely unsupportable statement. Now, sorry if I'm ranting. That's what I'm not paid to do here.
Yeah.
I have done blind tests up at Innovative Audio in Surrey, British Columbia with our good friend Gordon Soak, friend of the pod, where we tested like old amps versus new and some of these like super, because he specializes in a lot of these like 70s receivers that have colossal amounts of power and a really low distortion. And you do a blind test and a lot of times these things we did one with like a Pioneer and a Yamaha, like a brand new Yamaha and a Sony or whatever. And the Pioneer won, and you took apart the Pioneer. It's like, well, no wonder it won. It's got like a totally kick-ass power supply. And it's really, really well made. And the fact that it has really low distortion and a lot of global feedback does not mean it doesn't sound good. I'm sorry, you should discount anybody who says this. You should just discount their opinions. Just discount it. They're not putting in the work mentally or physically to say something intelligent about audio. This is just wrong.
And then, I found it slightly more frustrating that toward the end, he gets into the subject of audiophile tweaks and upgrades that are snake oil, right? And he talks about the one we've all talked about, putting green magic marker on your CDs and things like that. And he talks about a lot of the little magic discs and dots and stickers of the sort that Ted Denny sells. And his argument here is, well, you can just dismiss all of those because, science. And he does provide some good scientific explanations for some things, talking about inverse square law, things like that. And but it really boils down to, how would you know? Like we talked about in the last episode, this sort of silly notion that dismissing something is to claim that you know everything about physics or what have you. I mean, you don't have to know everything about physics, but there's still, we have to be open to the possibility that some of these things that sound like they shouldn't work, or some of these things that sound like snake oil, might actually in controlled testing reveal themselves to have some benefit, right?
They could.
But he's even dismissing that. And what it really boils down to is he's saying trust authority figures and trust experts, right? But don't trust the scientific process. And that's frustrating to me, because the easiest way to dismiss these stickers and dots and discs and things like that is to do controlled blind listening, right? But he has said, no, you can't do that. So what he's claiming is, don't do the thing that we know works and listen to me because I'm an expert and I owned this company. That's the most frustrating thing for me about all of this.
And the last paragraph is also really damning to me. Or you can just use your ears. That's the best, the fastest, and at least at this time, possibly the only way to determine what's the real magic of great music played in great sound or snake oil and voodoo. And the advocates of blind testing would say, exactly. Use your ears, not your eyes. Blind testing is using your ears. If you're afraid of blind testing, it's because you are afraid of using your ears. You are afraid of what your ears will conclude when they don't have help from your eyes. You are. Sorry.
Yep.
I am not afraid. Are you afraid, Dennis?
I'm not afraid, man.
Okay, Stephen Stone's not afraid.
Yeah, that's true. He is not.
I know someone who is afraid. This is my segue into the Patreon segment, and maybe into the end of this episode if you so choose.
Yeah, man, that seemed like a good segue to the credits.
Okay,
do some credits.
I do. This is a Butter Burger production.
Absolutely. It means it's produced by us. I am editing and mixing and mastering this episode.
Music by our sadly deceased friend Michael Gaughn, and who you should check out. And for those who missed the last episode, Michael was sadly not all that well known, but very consistent presence in the audio and video journalism world, who worked for Absolute Sound and Sound and Vision, and probably a couple of publications I'm forgetting. But he was a truly great editor and a great guy, and a damn good composer too. So,
absolutely. So, all right, bud. Any more credits, or are you ready to say goodbye to most people and kick one out for our patrons?
Let's say goodbye to most people.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate you, each and every one of you, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you liked what you heard and wish there'd been a little bit more of it, we got some good news for you.
Indeed, we do. If you check out patreon.com/Audio Unleashed, all one word, you can get new episodes a little earlier than everybody else.
And sometimes it's like a day or two early. Sometimes it's nearly a week. We never really know until we start editing.
But the big plus is that you get extended cuts of every episode. And usually that's going to mean a whole extra segment that's about maybe a geekier topic, or something that's a little more personal to us, or something that's just going to really appeal to the hardcore Audio Unleashed listener.
Yeah, what it boils down to is if you're somebody who would support Audio Unleashed on Patreon, we're going to make sure the bonuses to every episode are really aimed straight at your interests.
Yeah, and so if you want to hear these segments, you can subscribe to our Patreon for $3 a month, which is less than I spend every single day on my cup of coffee when I go to Starbucks to write my boring articles.
Yeah. One more time with that URL, that's patreon.com/Audio Unleashed.
Or Audio
Unleashed. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.